initiatives that have the defined leadership competencies or development programs or recognize that they need those. And then you're working with a leadership team, ideally not just a single owner or a CEO. So this isn't so much pertinent to one-on-one individual client practices or smaller businesses that don't have that organizational infrastructure. You may still get some tips out of this that will apply in terms of your discovery conversations, but it's really intended for coaches who are looking to do work inside organizations. Okay, my slide is not advancing. Okay, so what's the big difference when we're looking in this B2B environment of working with organizations as opposed to individuals? First and foremost, you will rarely be speaking to the person who you'll be coaching. It's more likely that you're speaking to somebody who's in an HR function or somebody who perhaps is a business unit leader that's having some challenges inside of their business unit, but you're talking to a decision maker, and that decision maker is going to be evaluating whether to bring coaching into an organization, which coach or coaching firm that they want to hire, investigating what the costs and scope of a program might look like if they did deploy a coaching program inside the organization. But we're really talking about the organizational pain, the business outcomes the organization is seeking to achieve, rather than the individual transformations. Of course, those will occur inside of this, but when we're in the discovery conversation, we're talking about what the problem is to the organization and what outcomes they're looking to achieve. So that's the biggest difference. And within the discovery process, you really have three distinct steps. You've got the discovery conversation itself, where you're asking probing questions using your coaching skills to come to a diagnosis of what the situation is inside this organization. And then you're moving into a collaboratively designed solution with that decision maker or decision makers. And oftentimes there will be multiple decision makers inside these conversations. Then you're moving into creating a proposal that's based on documenting the solution you collaboratively designed together. There's some background noise that's coming up, so I'm not sure where it's coming from, but if whomever that is could mute, that would be great. So you're moving into the proposal creation so that you're documenting a solution you designed together. It's very important that you do that design process together. And then finally, you're going to move into a review meeting where you're working with that decision maker or decision makers to walk through what that documentation is, confirmation of the solution that you created together. Okay, so who am I and why am I talking about this topic? So I started my career in corporate, and I did spend about 15 years inside corporate environments working at major media companies at Time Magazine and Sports Illustrated, Architectural Digest, to name a few. And then I pivoted into more entrepreneurial environments because I was seeking to have more direct impact. So for about the last 20 years, I've been building growth strategies for professional service firms with a real concentration on coaches and consultants that are in B2B environments. I actually started my first company in 2009, and it was a B2C company. And I grew it to about $500,000 after 2 years. And in that process, realized I didn't like B2C environments and really wanted to get back to B2B. And so then I started working with a media startup as one example, where we really increased revenues and profitability over a year of working together. Worked for almost 10 years with a training and consulting firm where they achieved recognition on the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies list. Many of you, or some of you on this call, may have had a conversation with me in that iteration of my career. And then more recently worked for a couple of years with an executive coaching firm that had been in business for about 20 years and about that level of revenue, and reversed a very serious revenue decline that occurred, switching that out, stopping the decline and reversing that to growth, and realizing about $1.5 million in new revenue over the course of a year or so. And I've had so many conversations, as I've mentioned, about growth strategies for organizations. And I'm really passionate about helping people who are going out on their own to achieve success in their businesses. And what I want to be want us to be very clear about is that in the market today, there are really two entry points for coaching to come in. You're looking at coaching as a commodity versus coaching for transformation. The advent of many of these platforms, such as a Better Up, have gotten where some companies are looking at providing a coach for many employees as a perk, as opposed to part of a defined leadership development program. And that becomes a little bit more of an on-call resource with ad hoc deployment, certainly lower fees. The last number I heard was that some coaches on a Better Up platform might be getting paid $75 an hour, which of course is much different than what you see when you're in a coaching for transformation role and you end up competing on price. Versus when you're in coaching for transformation, where it's more commonly mapped to specific leadership competencies. There is a selection criteria of who gets a coach and what is that process. It's more of a strategic partnership between you and the organization that should be a long-term relationship in which you can command premium fees because you're looking at the outcomes that they want to achieve from that. But what you want to understand very quickly when you're in a conversation is which door are you going into? How does this organization value coaching? Because if you're misaligned from the beginning, you're going to be misaligned in terms of goals and outcomes. When it's a commodity, they're not really thinking about what are the outcomes that we want to achieve in these kinds of coaching relationships. Whereas when you're in the transformation lane, it is very much about recognizing the people and what those people can do for the organization. So much different value there. And while you're in discovery, your role throughout the process is not about convincing. The best place to be in a discovery conversation is to not be thinking about what might I sell this person, what might close from here, but really staying detached from the outcome, really staying in a place of curiosity, again, leaning into those coaching skills that you have, and answer the questions around what is the problem that is being experienced in this situation right now? Can I solve that? Am I suited to be the solutions provider to this situation, to this organization, or these people that I would want to work with? And uncovering whether the organization has any sense of urgency to solve this. So I always say it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to have the problem. What really has to be there is that they recognize that they have a problem and that there is a sense of urgency to put the time and the money into solving the problem. And they're at a place to do that now. So these are really the key questions that you're seeking to ask for yourself so that you can properly evaluate this prospect in terms of doing business with you. And there's two phases inside here, which is the diagnosis and then the solution. And yours is the diagnosis. So you're using your coaching skills to ask probing questions, and then from the answers that you're receiving, coming up with a diagnosis of what the situation is. But then you move into a solutions phase, which is now where you're working collaboratively with the decision maker to say, okay, here's what we're seeing as the problem. So let's think about what the best solution is. And again, you may be working with multiple decision makers. That's quite common inside, especially larger organizations, that there's different voices to be heard about what's the scope of engagement going to look like, how are we going to deploy it, what's the investment level that's going to occur, over what term are we doing this? Because these really should be long-term relationships that you are entering into. And you want to see this as the first step in your work together. So this is step one in the client journey of your work together with this organization. So there's some critical things that you need to understand in order to be able to do that diagnosis of the situation. You want to know, first and foremost, how are they going to make a decision? Who is making the decision? What kind of criteria are they going to use? How many solutions are they comparing? How many other firms or individuals are they talking to about providing the solution here? Where are they in their buying journey? Was there somebody else that they had been working with that didn't work out? Why didn't it work out? Why are they seeking to make a change now? So questions that you want to know about why are we even on the phone addressing this at this time? What has happened inside the organization that is making this a now situation? Because we all know that people do live with pain for a long amount of time before they seek to make a change about it. So, and it's also the other part that I would always want to know about is there an incumbent that's here? So a lot of times when you're talking, especially to larger organizations, they may have to put something out to bid, and you want to know, is there somebody that is already a preferred provider, or is this an open playing field? And then what, as I said, what is that criteria that's going to be used to make the decision so that you can tailor a solution to meet that criteria? But if you don't know that you're talking to the people who can actually say yes and have the budget and authority to move this through, you're not going to be able to put together a solution that addresses all of the concerns. So it's really important to understand that all the players are involved. And, I've had even situations where an intern was told to contact to get some information who, about different coaching options. And there's only so much information that you're going to provide in that situation, enough for them to want to have a conversation with you. But you want to limit, you're not going to be able to do a discovery conversation with an intern who's collecting information, and you don't want to use your time that way. So the fastest path to getting into that conversation is when you can then begin it. And if you're in a conversation with somebody who is a decision maker, but not the sole decision maker, you can get to a certain level of discovery with them. There's still some value and merit to that, but it doesn't make sense to put together a proposal until you know you've got the other decision maker voices in that conversation. The second part that you really want to understand is around how is this problem scoped? What is it costing the organization? So, again, as we talked about, what's the current pain and the impact? Who is actually being affected by this? What is it costing? And those costs can be tangible and intangible as well. We think about something like employee engagement, which is a quite intangible situation, not really readily qualified. However, in the tangible side, that can move into retention. And if you're having retention issues, that's a very expensive problem for organizations to solve. So you really want to understand, like, how are they seeing that they have a problem? Are revenue goals not being met? Are people leaving the organization? Are their lack of productivity from having this is something that happens, the decision-making authority isn't clear and it's impacting their ability to advance initiatives throughout the organization. But you're trying to get to not just the surface part that somebody's coming to around this certain situation, but what are the knock-on effects from that? What's the full scope of the problem? Because without understanding the full scope and the impact, you're not going to be able to create an accurate diagnosis of the situation. And it's really important, and again, a key area where your coaching skills come into play, to not jump to a solution mode too quickly. It's so common with all of us that when we're talking to a prospect and they start talking about a problem that they have, we move right to the solution. Oh, I know how to solve this. And we want to talk about, because that's the part of our work that we love, right? Is how do we solve it? So we wanted to hold off and not jump into the solution too quickly, but really let the decision makers sit inside the pain of what's going on inside the organization. And it's for both of your benefits to be able to do that. You want them to understand what happens, what are the consequences of not taking action, and not just, again, the surface part of it, but really looking into, well, if you have a retention issue, you might have an issue in leadership, because we know people leave, bad managers, not organizations. And so we can look at that retention side, but we need to look at what's causing it as well. And what's actually happening. Is there a problem with hiring, right? Are we not hiring the right people that are coming in? So really getting into what's the full scope of of the pain that's going on inside of the organization. You want them to more fully grasp what the whole scope is, so that they're not just chalking it up to one symptom that occurs that is really part of a larger problem that's inside the organization. So you really want to sit in this place for a while. And I was just speaking with a client about this earlier this week, that about the discovery side of this. And she was saying to me, what happens when we don't sit in that pain, let them sit in their muck for a little bit longer, is that we go to contract and then we start working with them and find out that there's three pieces that need to be addressed before we can even get into the scope of our contract. And now you're starting with a scope creep problem right from the beginning. So this benefits you and it benefits the prospect as well, to be able to just sit here for a little bit and get to a full scope of problem. There's also, talking about the retention issue, because it is such an expensive issue. There are estimates that anywhere from 100 to 400% of a person's salary is the cost to replace somebody inside an organization. Obviously, the higher up they are, the more costly it is to replace them, not just from the cost of doing a replacement, but the lost work that is done, the impact it has on other employees. So it's a very expensive problem. And the truth is that A players do not want to play around in a mediocre environment. And if an organization is losing top talent or struggling to attract it, then that's a symptom of leadership and culture issues that obviously coaching can address and make an impact on. And so that's a key thing for people to understand, is that this is a very expensive problem. It's not going to change, and you're not going to be attracting the talent you want to be able to meet the initiatives. Of course, this assumes that an organization wants to have the A players in there, and they're not seeking to be happy in a mediocre environment. The third part that you want to understand is what's their sense of urgency and what are the consequences of not moving forward. So asking, when do they want to make a change, right? Is this a wish list item or a to-do list item? Is this a nice to have or a need to have? Do you want to move forward now, or you may think that it's a Q1 initiative? And, in the case that it's something where they're thinking about it for the future, but not for now, it's okay, again, to do some level of a discovery conversation to see what's going on. But I really wouldn't move into the solution mode today. You can scope out some things that it might look like, but if they're not thinking about doing anything for another 6 to 12 months, your proposal can very well be irrelevant by the time that they're ready to move forward. You're locking yourself into pricing, you're locking yourself into today's dynamic. And so I really wouldn't get too far down into the solution side of it, other than broad strokes of ways that it could be applied, and maybe get to some budget conversation, which would always be helpful. But you want to know what happens if the situation doesn't change. Somebody earlier today was asking me, can we convince them to move forward sooner if they're thinking about not moving forward sooner? And I think the only thing that you can really do is explain the cost of not taking action today, what the potential outcomes are that could happen over the time that inaction happens, what those potential consequences are, um, and then see if that moves them to want to move forward sooner. But if ultimately they decide, you know what, no, this is not an initiative for us to do now, there's very little that you can do to convince somebody to move forward sooner. But the real question is, how long can you live with this situation, right? If I'm going to continue to use the retention example because it's so pertinent. That, what if you lose your key player who's leading a product launch? What happens then? And what happens to that launch? So those are some real consequences that can occur. Another client I was talking about is working with a product company. So with a product company, if it's taking you 3 months longer than you expected to get that product to market, that's 3 months of revenue that you will never gain back. And that's real revenue. That's a real dollar amount that you can get to in terms of that. And that compounds. That's not just for this product, that's for every product. So if you can improve decision making inside of an organization so that they can bring a product to launch sooner, that's a real expensive problem that they need to solve and has very tangible outcomes. And then that moves right into the budget and the value part of this. Have they allocated any budget toward this initiative? What does success look like? It's really important to understand for them, what does success look like? If we do this engagement, what are the outcomes that you're seeking to see from it? And now we can start to quantify those, like we were just talking about with the product launch. So you can start to quantify what happens when you're realizing those outcomes. So now you understand what your endpoint is that you're seeking to achieve. You'll understand, can I actually help them achieve that outcome? Am I the right person to do this with them? And then put a value to it so you can start getting to a place where you're estimating what a budget might be for this engagement. And I like to, before you get into the actual solutions part of it in the collaborative design of that, to think about a range as you're going through these questions and you're thinking about what the solution might be to it. It's totally appropriate to throw out, this feels like it's probably going to be about 30 to 60,000 to work on this. How is that landing with you? So that you can start to get a gauge of where they are in terms of a budget. And if they say, yeah, that sounds about right to us, then perfect, you can keep moving forward. And if it's something where they say, that's not quite where we're at, then we talk about what might some options be. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. I want to take a detour for a moment to talk about the pricing mindset. The A lot of people who go out on their own, one of the things that they struggle with is that you're asking somebody to pay you to do this work together. And I encourage you to shift away from the idea that I'm getting paid to do this engagement to the organization is making an investment in getting to a different end place. So they're actually making an investment to achieve these outcomes we've been discussing and solving an expensive problem. And then when you think about it that way, it's taking yourself out of the equation and really focus instead on what outcomes am I helping to achieve. So what's the problem? What's the solution? What's the urgency? What's the value of the transformation? And putting it in that structure. And when you're pricing to the value of the outcome instead of your time, you keep the focus on their return on investment. So when I'm working with a new client, I talk to them about the investment you're making is to realize revenue that today does not exist. And so now we're talking about, and that revenue doesn't exist today, but it will exist, and not just for next year, but for years going on. A lot of the work that I do is around pricing so that we're pricing to outcomes, which then strengthens your position in the marketplace, obviously also compounds on itself. Because if you're charging more for an engagement, you're charging more for multiple engagements. And so that's a compounding effect that you realize from that. The other part of it is that when you're understanding how you help these organizations achieve the outcomes and what value they get from that, that's reinforcing your position in the marketplace. That's making you more confident in terms of the services that you're providing to them and in speaking about how valuable the work that you do is. So it really is, we used to call in business school a virtuous cycle where it just reinforces upon itself. And the other part is as we get more efficient in our work in terms of, utilizing AI and what we're doing, ideally we're spending less time in some ways, but you shouldn't be paid less because your experience and expertise is real. And then you can also focus then on higher level activities with your clients as that occurs. So I know many, many people, it's very easy to use a dollars per hour and estimate a number of hours to come up with a package price for your clients. But I encourage you to step away from that. I think that's still a great sniff test to do. That once you come up with a value of transformation that you're capturing, Make sure, of course, that it is hitting your numbers in terms of what you need to make to cover your costs, but to move away from pricing in that regard. I think that you're just not giving yourself the value that you deserve in that situation. So we talked about what if their budget doesn't meet the full solution. So you and your decision makers can scope out what the ideal solution to this initiative looks like. And they say, you know what, I just don't know that I can get that kind of budget to fly through the organization right now. There's a lot of different options you can make. First and foremost, you want to be really explicit that this is step one in what's going to be a long-term relationship. That yes, we can dial back and we can make it smaller, but the last thing that you want to have happen is to be in that one and done land of, we delivered a workshop and now our work together is done. And you also want to be really clear with your prospects that we can scope back, we can take the scope back a little bit, we can start with some smaller steps, but we know that what the full solution needs to be to achieve the transformations that you're seeking. So these will work short term for some of those steps to hit some of those outcomes, but we know that we're always working toward what that full solution is. So a couple things that you can look at doing, and I mentioned doing a workshop. So let's say that an organization wants to roll out some new leadership development principles or competencies. And so you can have a workshop with some of the leaders that will be impacted by that. Another option is to do a group coaching program. So maybe take a group of leaders through and pick some of their more critical leaders to go through a group coaching program instead of doing one-on-one coaching with everybody. You could also look at a critical team. So, I mentioned product launches a couple times. That ties so directly into revenue. So maybe we look at prioritizing the teams that have the most impact to the organization and start working on making those more productive teams functioning better to realize their goals and objectives quicker. There's one organization that we worked with where we introduced a pilot program. So there were, 250, 300 managers that they ultimately wanted to bring everybody through, but let's start with a pilot and get that humming really effectively, and then do a slow rollout through the rest of the organization as the results are being achieved. And in another instance, where again, one-on-one coaching wasn't an option for all of the leaders, they opted for assessments and a debrief on some of the lower level people so that they could identify who the top talent was, who are the people that we should be nurturing for next steps. But again, key in all of this is to be explicit that this is just step one in what is ultimately going to be a long-term relationship together. And it's important to understand that whether they're spoken or not spoken, there are a couple concerns that will live in your prospects' minds. And so while you're in conversation with them, a couple of the questions that they're going to be thinking is, are you going to perform as you say you will? Can I trust you to be the vendor that I need you to be? Will this be what they say, a career limiting decision if I hire you to come work with us? That saying that nobody ever got fired for hiring IBM exists for a reason. They were very consistent in their delivery and ability to work with inside organizations. It's the worst thing that happens is if somebody decides to bring you in and all of a sudden they're getting feedback from other people that they're having trouble working with you. You don't want to create headaches for the person who's choosing whether to hire you. And then the other question, of course, is whether this engagement is going to be more work for me. So that question of how much work am I going to have to do if I hire you is real. They always say status quo is your biggest competitor because it's easier to do nothing than to move forward. So you want to be proactively addressing these concerns as part of your discovery and collaborative creation. You want to talk with them about how you're going to take this off their plate, not put more work on it, about why this engagement will move smoothly and that those concerns won't have to be addressed, that you've got the internal capacity to adequately service this client. That's a really critical concern. So based on your discovery, there's three likely outcomes that occur from that. In one case, you've got the decision makers there. You realize that they've got the budget. They see the value in what you're providing, and they have an urgency to move forward. And you're in solution mode with them, and you're putting together what that looks like, and then bringing that to a proposal that you'll review with them. The second is that, you've gone through the conversation and you're realizing that the budget just isn't there to move forward with the full solution. And so in that case, you're deciding together what makes sense as that gateway engagement. And again, being clear that this is a long-term relationship. This is just step one in our long-term relationship. And and then also what makes the most sense in terms of those first steps. You could even map out for them, like, here's the gateway, and then here's what steps two through 10 look like, and just have that, so that you both have that roadmap in front of you. And then the third part is you're realizing, it's not the right time. And so you put them in a nurture for later to stay connected with them in a meaningful way. One of the metrics in the market is that only 3% of the market is buying at any given time, and another 7% is going to make a buying decision very soon. But that leaves you 90% that is in a, ready sometime, ready never situation. And so it's really important for you to have a meaningful nurture for the people who aren't buying from you now, so that you can stay top of mind to them, so that when they are ready, they think of you. So you just want to be in their consideration set when they're ready. And when people are ready to go, they are ready and they're ready now. And so if you haven't stayed top of mind with them, they may not even remember that they had a conversation with you. So really important that you have some way that you are keeping in touch with your prospects that's meaningful to them. I want to go over a few red flags that help you understand that the prospect is not a viable prospect for you at this time. And it may be that you decide the other red flag is that you're discovering through your discovery conversation that maybe this isn't an organization you want to work with, that maybe their interpersonal dynamics aren't there, and that's perfectly fine. You get to decide if you want to work with them or not. And some of the other signals that come up are around really not having a sense of urgency. If a prospect isn't able to articulate, well, who else would be involved in the decision, and what kind of budget might there be, and what's the likelihood that if we scope this out that you would actually move forward, or it's not a great situation, but it's okay, we can live with it. Those are all signals that this is probably not a now prospect for you. And then you can decide about put them in a nurture, or maybe refer them to somebody who could help them in a different capacity. And the other one that I put up here is around that misalignment on value, where we talked about coaching as a perk versus coaching for transformation. It's perfectly fine for you to choose to, especially when you're first starting out, to choose to do a workshop, and that they're saying, you know what, we just want to do the workshop. We're not interested in anything more. And you may decide for your own cash flow purposes that, you know what, I'll do that workshop. And that's fine. As you grow your practice, as you continue to expand, you naturally get more selective with your clients and the people that you work with, because one of the things you discover is that it is so much more satisfying to work with clients who are going for the transformation and really want to partner with you to do that. But again, there may be times that you just decide, I'll just take this, and for whatever reason, do that now. But it's a decision, conscious decision that you're making in that. So key takeaways that I want you to remember as we come toward a close here. Number one is understanding that commoditization fork. So really probing in on what do you value about this? And do you see the value of coaching to help transform your organization, to reinforce those leadership development competencies, to improve your retention and employee engagement? The second is making sure that all of those decision makers are in the conversation. So as we mentioned earlier, it's okay to do a discovery light if you're speaking to someone who's not the ultimate decision maker, but you really want to get to a place where everybody who's going to have a say in this is involved in the conversation so that all of those concerns can be unearthed. The discovery is a diagnostic process that you're going through to get the answers that you need in order to move into the solution being created collaboratively with those decision makers. Mentioned a lot about staying in that pain longer. Don't jump into solutions too quickly. It really doesn't ultimately benefit either of you if you jump to solution mode too quickly. And you may have a prospect that wants to jump right there, but this is where again, you can use your fabulous coaching skills to slow the process down. Let me ask a few more questions and just understand this a little better before we can really move into solution. Addressing that budget early and offer those gateway options. So really understanding what budget they do have, what timeline that they want to move on, and what might be some interim solutions if they're not in a place where they can move fully forward. Really encourage you to never do a proposal without a discovery conversation. Sometimes, especially again, when you're first starting out, it can be very tempting. It looks like this is business and I potentially could close this. And so I'm just going to put something forward, but without a discovery conversation, that is a guess. And when you're guessing, you're probably going to guess wrong. And you won't even know why, right? Which part of it, whether the scope or the price, or you won't even understand why. And then you always want to walk through your proposal together with the decision maker. So you don't just want to go through a collaboratively creating a solution and then just send something over. It's really critical that you get back on a call with the decision makers and say, okay, this is what we scoped out together. Let's talk this through. Ideally, it's not a surprise, right? Ideally, you get onto that conversation and they're saying, yes, this is exactly what we thought that it was going to be. This meets the concerns that we had, and we're ready to move forward. So that's a great place to be. But if you just send it over and you don't have that conversation, you risk not knowing why if you don't hear from them again. I think that's one of the reasons that ghosting occurs is when you just send that over and don't have that further conversation. And then finally, I would say don't ever leave a meeting without a specific and clear follow-up plan. So whether that follow-up is, we're going to get on the call with other decision makers next week, or we are going to schedule our conversation to walk through the solution that we just created collaboratively in another week, or you said it's a Q1 initiative, so I'm going to follow up in Q4 that we can get an appointment on the calendar and have a meeting about getting that ready for Q1. So it's really important that you have a mutually agreed upon follow-up plan with your prospect for what comes next. Okay. So I'm going to move into Q&A, but I am offering for anybody that would like to see today's slides, you can scan the QR code. I have also created a free discovery question framework that I'm happy to send to you. So you can scan the QR code, and then we'll be able to send those out to you. You're also welcome, of course, if you have any challenges that you're having in your discovery conversations or feeling like you should be closing more than you are. Pricing is, as I mentioned, another area. I'm happy to have a conversation with you and to schedule a call. And with that, we can move right into Q&A.
That's
So
perfect timing, Mary. Just wanted to just make sure that we were jumping into Q&A. So thank you so much for that. Also, yes, as Mary mentioned, we're jumping into Q&A. Thank you, Mary, for showing for dropping in that QR code because the question was asked about the slides. So yeah, please feel free to drop in questions in the chat. I do so see that there were some just tips added into the chat and aha moments from a lot of our participants, Mary, as you were going through your presentation. So continue to drop those in the chat. Thank you.
Okay. So the slides we talked about, recording, that's on you about the recording. Hi, Jessica, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And Beza, I know we communicated yesterday. Okay. Anybody have any questions that you want to bring up? You want to talk about any situations that you've had recently that you could have gone differently? Beza, you have a question?
Yes, Erica's hand was up first. I'll let her go and then I
Okay.
can. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, Erica. Well, you're muted. Do we unmute you? Wait, do we unmute or does...
I did. Sorry,
There
I
you
thought
go.
I did.
There you
I
go.
was feverishly typing my question into the chat, so good to be talking with you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have been in sales leadership roles in corporate for a long time. And one of the things I'm hearing about, I haven't seen this yet personally in my practice, but I'm hearing some other coaches who do work with corporates that the companies are starting to ask for a line item detail in their invoicing. Clearly, that's procurement strategy to get the margins down, and so they can cut out some of those line items that they perceive that they don't need. So I'm just curious. I mean, obviously, we want to load the value into whatever they value is kind of my general, rule of thumb from a sales perspective in general about that. But I'm just wondering from a coaching, I'm new to the coaching industry, I should say. That might have already been obvious, but what are you seeing that same thing happen? And if so, how do you recommend to address that to maintain margins?
Well, the procurement thing is real, right? And if you're going through an RFP process, you're going to have to deal with procurement, and they can get into that kind of nitty-gritty. And there's not a lot that you can do about it because their process is their process. So that's oftentimes especially if you're working on an RFP. And then that also sometimes signals, I remember working on something with TIAA, where they were trying because they were talking to several different vendors and they were trying to get to an apples to apples comparison. And because each vendor was presenting their number in a different way, like here's a 6 months package, or here's a 3 months package, or here's an hourly rate, or whatever it was, that they just needed to get to some commonality. And I had to work with the procurement person to get it to where they needed to be. And by the way, we did end up winning that proposal. So the best thing, Erica, and it's not a very satisfying answer, is that if you're working with procurement, there's not a lot you can do. They're going to lead the process. The best thing is to not have to work with procurement, right? To be able to find the HR person, to be able to find the business unit leader that wants to make that change so that you can get out of that process. And that's a choice that you make whether you want to do an RFP or not, because they take a lot of time. And the other thing that I found out in going through the RFP process is sometimes they were looking to do a leadership development program that they wanted to overlay coaching with. Sometimes they just wanted an ad hoc coaching vendor. So now you go through a whole RFP process only to find out that maybe somebody's going to call you once in a while when they want to coach. Right. So
Yes.
what I would say in the RFP process is take heavy advantage of the question period to find out, to ask questions like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
All right. Beza was here. Where did she go? Her hand was up.
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Mary. Wonderful presentation. It was reaffirming a lot of things that I know and then getting some really new helpful tips as well. I was curious if you could touch a little bit more on the budget piece, because I do feel like it's this dance sometimes. Like I had a discovery meeting with someone earlier this week, and they're like, oh, what do you charge per session? But when I started talking with this person, it sounded more transformational than commodity. So there's this interesting dance that we do around that. And so I always encourage people to let's get clear on the scope and then get to budget. And it can also feel very demoralizing to get through all the way to the end of creating things and then the person say, oh, wow, that doesn't quite fit.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned you might have to scope it down and all of that, but I loved your framing around giving some sort of range. And so I was
Exactly.
wondering where's a good point to like insert that in the process from your experience?
Early. Early, because you don't want to get to this place as you talk about where, you're thinking transformation and you're building, this great solution, but they're they have a, what do you say, like a Honda price for a Lexus, a Lexus option. So early, right, is to look at, and it's not appropriate to me, it's not appropriate to be asking what's the cost per session, because what happens in a session? Nothing, right? You want to own that you're trying, like, what are you trying to achieve here? And if you're trying to achieve that, I don't think you can do much in less than 6 months, right? And so this cost per session is it doesn't matter, because what we're working toward is the goal. Are you looking to get, are you looking to advance inside the organization? You're talking a little bit more, maybe, I don't know, was it with an individual or head of HR or business unit leader?
This one was with an individual, but she
Yeah.
mentioned that her organization would pay for it. So she was
Mhm.
kind of like, let me go back and see the budget. And then she messaged me, maybe it's professional development funds. So it's kind of swaying between, it could be transformational, it could be commodity. So just trying to listen to, maybe have another meeting to further explore.
Yeah, but I would be upfront about that, I know that there's this idea of like everybody gets a coach as a perk versus the coaching for transformation. I would just be upfront that I'm in the coach for transformation, like what kind of initiatives are you working on? What's going to happen? Where can you advance to in the organization? Because you want to help, and this is another point that is really important, is whomever you're speaking to, you want to help them be able to make the business case for the decision in the organization. So you want to help them be able to give them the talking points for her to go to her manager about why she should hire you instead of somebody else. And the same thing with HR. I've got a client, we talk about this frequently. She has to help her HR people make a business case inside the organization for why they want to do a leadership development initiative.
I
And
love,
you,
love that. Thanks, Mary. It's like I'm partnering with this person so that we can make a case so whoever is paying for this could be on board as well.
exactly, exactly. Yeah, you're really important. Hi, Anne.
Oh, hi, Mary. Thanks so much for this. I feel hesitant to even ask my question. Um, I I've got a corporate client right now, and I don't do a lot with corporate teams, but I would like to do more. And I met with somebody yesterday, and I found myself woefully unprepared. And so I feel like there's the part of me that's like, yes, go in and have more of like a discovery coaching approach. And then there's the part of me that just wants to come in and like, sell all the features. And yesterday I was just like, oh my God, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to do any of it. And I didn't do any of it well, really, I think would be a very fair assessment of how the conversation went. So I'm curious, like, how do I prepare? How do you recommend preparing so that I've got enough info about what I can bring to the table where I'm not trying to sell prematurely, but it's also not just sort of this totally open-ended,
Yeah,
spit out kind of conversation.
yeah. I mean, it's important to know, like, this is a muscle that you're building. It's not intuitive. Nobody teaches you how to have discovery conversations, right? I got my MBA, and it's not like we ever talked about sales even. It's a fascinating thing because revenue is so critical. Like, if you don't have revenue, you don't have a business, and yet nobody teaches you how to sell. Right? And selling, should be it really is the first step in the client journey. So it's the first step of you working together, and just be super curious about, why did you want to have a conversation? What's the issue that you're trying to solve that you want me to help you with? And going through from that place of curiosity, not thinking about what you're going to offer. Don't even go there yet, right? Just really uncover what their situation is and how serious they are about making a change. And, I always say, look for the expensive problem, as you're having a conversation with people. but it's not, this shouldn't be a high pressure situation for you or for them, but you do want to help. You do want to drive the conversation. That's what's most important, is that you need to be driving the conversation, not your prospect.
Okay.
And I'm happy to send those discovery questions to you, because that might help you with just having some understanding of how you want to frame it. But I would start first with, like, as we went through in the talk, who's making this decision, right? Are you the decision maker? Do you have decision-making authority? Do you have the budget? Is there somebody else we need to include in the conversation? And then, what are the problems and what's it costing? And do you have, all of that. So yeah, that's that's what I would do. But take the pressure off yourself and just, like, I need some information before I can tell you what we might do.
Okay. And what if they think they don't really, I mean, this was just sort of serendipitous, right? And like, what if they think they don't have a problem?
There's not a lot you can do if they think they don't have a problem.
Okay.
And it's not worth spending your time on.
Okay.
You want to spend your time with people who recognize they have a problem and want to solve it.
Do something about it.
Yeah. And spending your time trying to convince people you're just going to get very frustrated, and so are they.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Hey, Jessica.
Sorry, really quick, Mary. I just wanted to point out we have about 5 more minutes. So I saw Jessica's hand was up and you were acknowledging her, Mary, but just wanted to let everyone know we have about 5 more minutes left.
Yeah. Yes, everybody can receive the discovery question. So you can either scan, if you didn't scan that QR code, I could pop it back up real quick, or you can send me an email at strategicinflectionadvisory.com. Let me see if I can get that back up. Jessica, go ahead. I'm going to put this.
I'm scooting in under the wire. Thanks for doing this, Mary. For anyone who doesn't know Mary, I've been following her for a little while now, and I'm kind of gobbling up all the content and presentations that she gives. So thank you for doing this one. I'm curious, and this may be opening another can of worms that's not appropriate. So feel free to just be like, that's another session. We get really excited when we get these discovery calls, because we feel like we've identified somebody and we've sort of like brought them down the pipeline to get to this point. And I feel like, and this is my primary responsibility in the business to do this, is to go out and find people and bring them into discovery conversations. And the top part of like going out and networking and, identifying the ideal customer feels relatively straightforward to me. The part between that and this discovery conversation feels a little bit more difficult or challenging. Visa's nodding and smiling, so I'm glad somebody else is feeling this pain too. Is there a quick tidbit or two that you could offer for the part that comes right before this part?
What do you mean, like from when you meet somebody at an event to how you get them on a call?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, when you're chatting with them at the event to find out, you have to figure out if somebody is ready to engage with you, right? That's the part, because if they're not, it can just, I think it's fine to have a conversation with somebody and just see where they're at, but that's just an opening conversation, right? You don't want to you're not planning to move into discovery from that conversation.
Right.
Because you just don't know enough about when you meet somebody while they're out. So you can offer to have a conversation. You can, offer for them to get onto your email list, right? In terms of staying in touch that way. And then just reach out if you feel like there's some reason for you to have a conversation. That's the most important part, right? Is the reason. So if you're meeting somebody and you meet somebody who, for instance, works inside of an organization, and you say, I work in leadership development, who handles that inside your organization? Who's, how do you guys decide when you're going to bring somebody in? Do you have an incumbent vendor or not? And then you just start to ask some questions around very, like, not pushy kinds of questions, right? Not pitchy kinds of questions, but just to understand, like, is this somebody you even do want to have a conversation with?
Okay.
Right?
I think that one of the I appreciate that. And the takeaway that I'm getting from all of your content and that answer is that I feel like some of these things are a little bit off limits or a little too direct, and I need to get over that. That's what I'm taking away from it. Yeah.
Get over it. Yeah. Because, you're just, we're all in business, like we're all doing business, whatever that business is, right? We're at a networking event for a reason. And to just, to be direct about it, sure. Not, again, not pitchy. Like I never, I'm not pitchy. So it's, never from that perspective, but just to, does it make sense for us to have a conversation?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome. All right. I think we are at time. And I'm going to just echo the who said this about executive presence, right? If you're selling executive presence, yes, you need to show up in the way that demonstrates that you can teach that skill. It's really important to realize that this is the first step in the client journey, and how you show up in here is how you show up in the engagement, and you're both evaluating each other about whether this is going to be a good fit. So I so appreciate all of you being here today. I had a great time. I hope that you are in touch, and I'm happy to have further conversations with any of you. And thank you again, ICF Georgia, for having me here and for co-hosting with me.
Hi, before everyone leaves, can we get a photo?
Sorry, there's a little delay here. Thank you so much, Mary. I've dropped in links for everyone regarding ICF upcoming events, the LinkedIn page, and where you can follow ICF at. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to the ICF staff. We will have the recording out to the participants. And again, thank you all for joining, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.